Hey folks, on this video I'm going to talk to you about tacky finish on your resin 3D printed miniatures. So here we go. As you know, I recently got into 3D printing in a big way, and I was actually really pleasantly surprised with how easy it is. I really had no major problems with anything except for one tiny little annoying fact. And that was that a lot of my early prints were coming out with a slightly tacky finish. And this is pretty common with resin printing. The resin, if it does not cure completely, will have a tacky feel to it. And in this video, I want to take you through the troubleshooting steps I recommend for trying to address this and really stop it being a problem in the future. So the first step to take is to investigate your layer cure time. So this is the amount of time that you are curing each layer of your print. This is particularly important if you've got a new printer or if you've just changed your layer depth. So maybe you've gone from 30 microns to 50 microns, but you kept the resin cure time the same, then you may well find that you're not actually curing each layer of the print fully. Remember that because it's a thicker layer, it's going to take a little bit longer to cure through that whole layer for the light. So do bear this in mind as you're making changes. The solution for this problem is to start adjusting the cure time for your layers. If you've been doing maybe 1.5 seconds, try your next print at 1.7 seconds and see how that does. Or maybe even ratchet it up to 2 seconds. Also, if you go too high, you will start losing detail, so keep an eye on that. I'd suggest trying to keep to simpler prints that are unlikely to fail, that are going to show a little bit of detail so that you can really dial this in. If you're not sure of what to use, in the description, I have a test print that I really recommend for helping dial in those resin layer cure times. Okay, so you've experimented a bit, you're pretty sure that you've dialed in your layer cure time and it's not the problem, but maybe you're still getting a slightly sticky or tacky finish to your prints. The next thing I'd recommend checking is that you are really thoroughly cleaning off the resin, the uncured resin, when you remove your print. Most resins are needing an ISO bath, or maybe you're using something else like simple green, perhaps denatured alcohol. Whatever it is, assuming it works, or if you're using water washable resin, using water, you really want to make sure that any of the uncured resin from the vat is removed from your print. I do this in a 3-stage process. So the first stage is that I tend to leave my prints hanging from the build plate for a little while after the build is completed, just for the majority of that resin to drain away and drop back into my tank so that I'm basically able to reuse that resin. And once I've got the majority of resin off of the prints that way, my next step is I will remove them and put them into a pickle jar. The pickle jar is filled with ISO. I'm using just regular old UV resin here, nothing, not eco, not water washable. And so I'll put them in that ISO bath. I'll swirl it about a bit, just help loosen up most of the remaining resin. And then I'll take an old toothbrush and I'll just quickly, lightly scrub the surface of the model to remove anything that's reasonably well stuck down. If you are concerned about damaging the model, maybe scraping it or something like that, you don't need to use a toothbrush like this, but I find it's helpful. You can always just get a softer brush. Try and use something with synthetic fibers like a Teflon brush that's gonna not get too badly damaged by the alcohol. After you've done this stage, the third and final stage that I do is I put it in my wash and go. I've got a Elegoo Mercury wash and cure machine. I know a lot of people use an ultrasonic bath for this. Do be careful if you're using isopropyl alcohol in an ultrasonic bath, especially if it has the heating element. Isopropyl alcohol is extremely flammable, and if you're agitating it, especially if you're also heating it, it is going to be prone to combustion, and that could be a really big problem. For me, I just use the wash and go. I'll just throw the pieces in there, leave it to run for maybe 10 minutes, and pull it out afterwards. So you've tried more rigorous washing of your resin. The next thing I would make sure that you're doing is really letting those pieces dry before you start to cure them. The isopropyl alcohol is not going to play too well in the UV, and sometimes if that isopropyl alcohol is mixing with the surface resin as the UV is trying to cure it, it's going to kind of bake in that tacky finish as it interferes with the ability of the resin itself to cure. So in this instance, what I'd suggest is leaving the models for a little while out in the open. Isopropyl alcohol has a very low boiling point, lower than water, so it evaporates pretty quickly. What I do is I sit them on a box in the sun, inside. Most windows in America in particular will have a UV filter on the window itself. So if you leave them on a box inside, they're not actually going to start curing, but it warms them up a bit to get rid of the isopropyl alcohol a little bit quicker. So you've now left your models to really dry thoroughly. And this is a great point to find out if you're likely to have success with your prints. Okay, if the models at this point, with all of that iso evaporated, are already pretty dry, not super tacky, then you're probably in a good place for a successful cure and finished resin that's not going to have that tacky feel to it. The last stage is to obviously make sure that you are curing your pieces for a long enough period of time. Now, there is a lot of concern with UV curing of resin, that if you let it cure for too long, it's going to cause the models to become brittle and break apart. And this is absolutely true. This can happen. But for the most part, if you just do it for less than 10 minutes, you're probably going to be okay. It will obviously depend on how powerful the UV lights you're using are. And what I would say is that if you put it in your UV cure and you've kind of rotated it around, made sure that all sides are getting cured, and you still have a little bit of a tacky finish, the next step that I would take is I would leave them sat properly outside for a couple of hours in the sunlight just to help really finish up that curing. If you do all of these things and you've still got tacky resin, some other elements that may impact your resin cure can include the resin itself preferring to be cured underwater. Some resins are impacted by oxygen in the environment when they are curing. If this is the case for your resin, you should be able to find this information online. And if you want to address this, I would suggest putting the pieces in a glass of water and curing it inside of that water or under the water. Another thing that could impact your resin curing are any additives that you've put in. If you're wanting to tint the color of your resin and maybe you've added some pigment into the resin vat, that could have an adverse impact on the ability of the resin itself to cure and harden. So just give that some thought. Maybe try curing the resin with no pigment or with less pigment or with a different pigment. All of these things could impact it. Obviously, in any curing process, in any resin printing, the environment around you is going to have a big impact, whether there's high humidity, high or low temperatures. Those things will all have an impact, so do be mindful of those as well. If you've been using the same liquid to clean your resin prints for a while now, and you've started getting tacky finishes on your pieces, that may be an indication that it's time to change that liquid as well, right? It can often be tell if the liquid has become cloudy, and there are things you can do to clean that up, maybe even so that you can reuse the liquid with either water or isopropyl alcohol. If you put it in an old water bottle, seal it up, and leave it in some sunlight, it should help the resin precipitate out as the resin cures and collects at the bottom. You can then pour that through a coffee filter back into whatever vat you're using to clean, or into a storage container as well. And finally, if all of these things fail, then the desperate last option that I would suggest is going with a different resin. If you've tried each and every one of these, if you are increasing your layer cure times a decent amount, you have really rigorously cleaned off excess resin, you've let it dry, you've cured it a good long time, removed pigments, all of that stuff, and you're still getting tacky finish on your pieces, unfortunately, it may just be a case of the resin that you're using does not play well with your printer or with your UV after print curing machine. So, if all else fails, I'd suggest that. As always, thank you so much for watching. Please do consider liking this video if it was helpful to you. Maybe even subscribe if you'd like to see more of my content. I'm doing a whole series on 3D printing as I go through the learning process, and hopefully share what I've found, the hurdles that I've faced with you, so that you don't have to. Also, please consider checking out a couple of the affiliate links I have below. Herrick Games and Hobbies is a wonderful family-owned store. I'm friends with the owner, and there's a $10 off discount on your first purchase with them. They're based in Boulder, California, but they ship to anywhere in the US. Also, Elric's Hobbies, who do amazing detailed resin bases. It really adds a little bit of pizzazz to your army at very little extra effort. They're very well priced, and you get an extra 10% off with the affiliate link in my description. Those things will help me out, as well as giving you a little bit of an incentive to go with them, so please do consider that. You can check out my other work on Instagram. I also have a blog, ragados.com. So, thank you for watching, and later days.